for a new experience, to see life from another point of view? New hope, new expression, new joy. This is your radio hour. Welcome to Viewpoint with Father John.
And welcome, friends. You are tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or on the World Wide Web at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John, and I am your host, Father John Reed. By the way, you can follow this show on Facebook at Viewpoint with Father John, or go to our website at www.viewpointwithfatherjohn.com. This is a listener-supported program, so you can click the button that says support, and you can help keep us on the air. All of God's children are endowed with extraordinary purpose and ability. I am on a quest to help as many as possible in fully realizing their divinely inspired potential. Disposing of false narrative and embracing genuineness inspires clarity of purpose. My role is to help overcome self-imposed limitations in realizing one's spiritual potential. And a lot of things going on right now in the Inland Empire. As you know, we have the fire going on up in Idlewild. So please keep the people in your prayers. It's a sad commentary that it was an arson-started fire. They do have the person in custody. And that's just, you know, you have to wonder about the sickness of someone who would do that. And they need our prayers as well, because they don't do that because they're happy, joyous, and free. They're doing it because of the fact that they do have mental illness and spiritual illness to do that. Also, on the social justice end of it, tomorrow is another deadline for the Trump administration to reunite these families that they should have never separated but did. And so please keep on the members of Congress, keep calling them to make sure that they are really staying on the back of this administration to reunite these families. There's no excuse for keeping these families apart. And they're trying to take 900 of these families and keep them separated because they already deported some of these people, which, by the way, when they deported them, they failed to give them due process. They skipped the 5th article of the Constitution. So stay on their backs about that. That's our job as a community. Remember, Jesus is about the poor people, about the families, about the strangers, about helping those who can't help themselves. And these people were not crossing illegally. That was really a false narrative. They were seeking asylum, and we do have a global agreement, international law, that when someone comes to seek asylums, we have to give them due process. They have the right to apply to it. Now, we also have the right to deny it, but we don't have the right to just deport them, and we certainly do not have the right to separate them from their children. It's inexcusable. This was a law that we as a society cannot be okay with. Do not let this become normalized. And so I call out to you, our listeners, who I know have a lot of heart and a lot of gumption, because I know that some of you make the calls when we suggest it, and I thank you for that. And some of the people who have been contributing to the show to keep us on air, I want to thank you for that. You kept us here another week, and I'm thrilled. And because of that, we get to have a dear friend of mine, Mr. Jack Jimenez, who's on our show this evening. And Jack has a very interesting background. He's both a life coach and a certified grief recovery counselor. And so we're going to talk about a myriad of different topics tonight. But most of all, I'm thrilled because he's my friend that he's here. So Jack, say hello to the people.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for having me tonight.
It's good to have you here. Now, you're a life coach. What does that mean?
Okay, a life coach is basically somebody that you have as a support system when you're trying to work out a specific issue or something that's going on in your life, and they direct you to come up with your own answers.
That's a very important thing you just said. You direct them to come up with their own answer. So you don't say, you should do this, that, and the other. You help them to find out really what their answer would be. Would that be a correct statement?
Absolutely, because each one of us has a different route, a different way of going. And for me to direct somebody in a way that may harm them is not beneficial to me or them. They need to find their own way, but you give them the guidance, the questions, the tough questions for them to dig in and find out what they need to find out.
So it'd be somewhat Rogerian then, like Carl Rogers, where you're actively listening and help them to ask the right questions so they can hear what their thoughts are. Would that
Absolutely. And if you see them stumbling and having a difficulty, in a firm but loving manner, to help direct them to where they want to go, but under their own direction and their own steam.
What are some of the issues that people come to you with without breaking anyone's confidentiality? Is there a regular narrative that you see on a regular basis, or is it just kind of a hodgepodge?
You know, it's interesting. Quite often I come across people that, for whatever reason, have lost their voices. Okay. And they're not heard, and they have a real difficulty with being assertive, with knowing what they need, what their rights are, and to help them. I feel like I'm the deliverer of the Little Mermaid.
Okay.
When she has to find her voice, or he has to find his voice.
It's funny you said that, because I was preparing folders this afternoon for a retreat I'm running this weekend out in Malibu. And when I want to relax, I put on Disney music. And I was listening to that very song from The Little Mermaid. So it's funny that you would say that. Just to back up a little bit, when you talk about they lose their voice, just for the clarity for my listeners, what you're meaning is you're not talking physically, well, although it can happen physically, but you're talking about their ability to speak up for themselves or to say that something's important to them or not. Would that be correct?
That would be correct, and to actually discover their right to be happy, discover their right to challenge old beliefs that have hindered them.
Right.
And in general, to be able to say, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, and I will be heard.
Good. It sounds like very healthy stuff. And you also deal with grief recovery. Let's talk about that for a moment. What does that entail?
Grief recovery is really my passion and something that I enjoy doing, and I quite often get people asking me, why would you want to do that kind of work? Because I believe in our society that we don't have a mechanism for grieving.
Right.
And the average person accumulates a lifetime of grief that they haven't processed, because we're taught to have a I'm fine, have a nice smile, and act like you're okay when you're not. So for me to be able to work for people and help them go over a lifetime of accumulative grief, and grief stacks up, becomes more and more and more, and becomes more detrimental to you living a fulfilled life.
Well, one of the things I tell families quite often, because I do a lot of funerals, is if you don't remember anything else I say, I hope you remember this: it's okay to not be okay. And I too tell them that when I go through grief, I quite often tell people I'm fine, but that stands for frustrated, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. And when you look at it culturally and the changes that have taken place over the last 50 years, 50 years ago, you could talk about grief, but you couldn't talk about sex. In fact, in the Midwest, a lot of houses had a room called the parlor. And one of the uses of the parlor, besides social engagements, was when somebody died, the family would wash the body, clothe their loved one, or the mortuary would help in a lot of cases, and then they would have what's called a wake, where people would come and out here we call it a viewing, and it was considered a natural part of life, but you could not talk about sex. Now, 50 years later, you can't drive down the freeway without seeing a gentleman's club sign. Everything in the media has sex involved with it to some extent, but we can't talk about grief. And, people have the attitude, act like nothing happened, act like everything's okay. And one of the things I find really traumatizing to people I work with going through funerals is the platitudes. Like, you should be happy they're in a better place. Well, I'm glad they're in a better place, but I miss them. Or at least they're out of pain. Well, the reason I found, and I'd like to get your input on this, that people do that is because they really don't know what to say. They don't know that it's okay to just put your arm around somebody, if you know them close enough to put your arm around them, and just listen. sometimes just sit with them in silence and let them have their own grief experience in a supportive environment. What is your take on that?
I believe that our society, or what I've observed of it, is it boils down to a grief leave when somebody passes away in a job. And it's been reduced to either 3 to 5 days, depending on what the relationship is.
Right.
You are to go home, take care of what you need to do, come back to your job. Don't miss a beat. Don't be emotional. And people avoid you like you have the plague because they do not know what to say. And I've literally seen people dive under desks. So somebody that comes back from bereavement leave will not see them.
Wow, that's pretty extreme. Well, one of the things when I was doing hospice and I was in the bereavement department, is we were taught that common grief, is 3 to 5 years, not a few months. And it's not that you feel the same way you feel tonight for the 3 to 5 years, but you're going to have a lot of triggers, and particularly the first 12 months, you're going to have a lot of first anniversaries, first birthdays, first holidays. What do you tell people who are going through the first 12 months?
Well, it's interesting. You help them process it, but in the grief work that I do, I look at literally their entire lifetime of grief. They actually do a grief recovery chart.
Oh.
And you list every single item your entire life that has accumulated and still cause you pain. An example of that is I, as a young boy, had a young dog. I mean, a dog that bred and had a lot of puppies.
Okay.
I was told she couldn't raise them all and I would have to get rid of some of the puppies. Well, in the household I came from, you wouldn't ask a parent that, and I proceeded to have to drown them.
Oh, my goodness.
I had a burlap sack, which I didn't realize didn't let water in, held the first puppy down, and when I brought it up, it was still alive and had to fill that up. That is a memory that is just like it happened today. And that's part of that accumulation of grief that we have to learn to process.
Well, yeah, and that kind of grief would also, in my training, would lead to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because of such a traumatic memory. It's what it does to the psyche is just incredible. So I think it is quite wise that you go through and have them do a mapping out of the different situations that have been accumulative grief. We're getting ready to come up to our first break. And after the break, we'll continue talking about what are some of the milestones that we go through in looking at these grief recovery programs. And so my guest tonight is Mr. Jack Jimenez, and we'll see you just on the other side of the break.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
If you're looking for a full or part-time sales position and you have radio, TV, or print media experience, KCAA has a great opportunity waiting for you that pays the highest commissions in the market. KCAA is the only station in the IE that broadcasts on 3 frequencies, so advertisers receive 3 ads for 1 low rate. This makes KCAA a must-buy for every local business. If you're interested in a sales position with us, email CEO@kcaaradio.com.
Erin here from On the Brink Morning Show, where we talk about all that is engaging in the Inland Empire. News, politics, business, family, things to do, and so much more. Join us weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. on KCAA 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, and 1050 a.m. or on kcaaradio.com.
And welcome back. You are tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or on the World Wide Web at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John, and I am your host, Father John Reed, and I'm here with my friend, Mr. Jack Jimenez, who is both a life coach and a certified grief recovery counselor. And when we left for the break, we were talking a little bit about mapping out the grief experiences throughout the life. And one thing I've found, and I'd like to get your take on this, is we have different types of grief depending on the situation of what we're grieving. Case in point, that when someone dies of cancer, while we grieve that, and it certainly is a real grief, it's a different kind of grief than when somebody leaves by suicide, or someone is left through homicide, or a traumatic incident such as a car wreck. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Again, I look at grief as an accumulative. Now, if I had somebody that came into me and had one of those recent losses, of course we would address that right off and very much encourage them to have their feelings, to talk about it, to keep talking about it. Don't put on the I'm fine face. It is okay for us to grieve, and it takes as long as it takes.
Yes. To get better on your timeline, not somebody else's.
Absolutely.
Good. Is there a common theme that seemed to drive people into you? Because my experience has been is the latest grief is just kind of like the straw on the camel's back, but it's usually been many things that have been pushing up for a long time that finally said, I can't carry this alone anymore. Has that been your experience?
That has. It has been more unusual for me to talk to somebody that has had a recent death. I recently worked with a lady that had lost her son the previous year.
Wow.
And she was totally devastated and could not look at anything but the horrible circumstances at the end.
Right.
And she worked on that. I have another person I'm working with that lost somebody in a tragic accident 20 years ago.
Right.
And it's still affecting how they do life and how they do relationships.
Certainly. And one of the most difficult things for me as a priest is when somebody loses a child, because it goes so against what we think of as the natural order. We're not supposed to bury our children. And when we do, there's nothing in our toolbox for that type of loss. And I think in our society, we have a lot of growing to do to help support people going through that. You said something earlier I want to go back to that I think is really prophetic, in the fact that in the work environment, you've seen people dive under desks to keep from talking to someone who's coming off of bereavement leave because they can't deal with the emotions of it. So how do we face it?
You know, as simplistic as it may sound, I have learned, and I do this, I've been doing it for over 30 years. The only thing I say is I'm very sorry to hear of your loss, and if you ever need to talk to anybody, let me know.
That's it.
That's it.
And it's
No
probably
more than
just
that.
enough. That's probably just enough. I find it really difficult for a lot of people when they get bombarded with advice. I equate it to trying to get a drink out of a fire hydrant. All this stuff's coming at you, and you just want a little sip, but you're being pushed across the street with all the advice that's coming at you. And I think that does more harm than good. Now, that's just one point of view. But with the people I've worked with, that seems to be a common theme. Now, you talked a little bit about your traumatic upbringing, and I've known you for a little while, and we've shared some things that there's some areas where our childhood really kind of aligned with each other with some of the drama that we went through and trauma. How does that affect your work now?
I believe the most beneficial part of that is, yes, we've all had various trauma, and I've had a great deal, but it has given me, I don't talk about something that I haven't walked through myself.
Very wise.
And when I started the grief recovery over 30 years ago, I had not even been in contact with my biological family for 4.5 years, any of them. And after I completed the first one I did, I contacted my mother and says, "Do you want a relationship with me? Let's talk." And I was able to forgive a lot of stuff that I had not been able to work through before that.
Sure. And we're not talking about just a mother-son disagreement. I know a little bit about your background, and share with me what you're comfortable with. I know that there was some real cruelty involved, and that was part of the reason for the separation. Sometimes, in some cases, the healthiest thing for people to do, and there's going to be people who disagree with this, but you're welcome to have your own opinion. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is separate from toxic situations. I know in my case, with all the mental illness that was going on with my mother, where she actually tried to commit homicide on we children, it was not just emotionally safety, but physical safety as well, that we had to separate ourselves and say, you can put the music on, but we're not going to dance. And that takes a lot of growth to do. How did you go about finding your growth where you found your voice and the strength to be able to say, it's not okay to treat me like this?
Well, I have been involved in a 12-step program called Al-Anon for the last 37 years, and it's for families that have been affected by alcoholism, drug use, addiction, basically.
Right.
And in that journey, I had to learn how to set boundaries. I was a family enabler. I was the one that took care of everybody. I would say by the time I was 4 years old, I believed that my role in life, the reason I was put on this earth, was to take care of my mother, who was a very violent, very out of control alcoholic female. And she literally wanted me as her surrogate spouse most of the time.
Sure. Now, when you say build boundaries, what does that mean?
Oh, I could remember one of the ones that we had not had any holidays from the age of 4 years old to 24. No Christmases, no Thanksgiving, no nothing, not so much as a birthday card for your birthday. And when I got into recovery and I got back with my family, I said, we're going to have Christmas at my house. However, there will be no alcohol served. No one can drink when they're there. If you came to my doorstep and you had been drinking, I would have asked you to leave. And I set some very strong boundaries. Now, when I'm at their home, it's their rules. And if I choose to be there, I have to know that. But when you're in my home, I get to set boundaries and I get to set rules.
So you create your own safe place.
Absolutely.
That's good. It sounds very healthy. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, that they don't realize that they have the right to create their own safe space. That when you come into my home, While it's not a dictatorship, there are certain rules that we have of common decency that have to be observed. And I know that with Gabby and I, we in our home it's a very warm environment, but there are some absolutes in that as well. Just like, you know, you would not speak rudely to my wife or to me and such. And you can do that without having to be overbearing with people. But if you're first learning to do this and you're a little bit overbearing with people, it's okay. You'll find your balance eventually. It's better to go a little too far at first and be able to come back than to never speak up and say, this is a problem. Never tell people it's not okay to walk all over me. It's one thing to be cordial. It's another to be a doormat. And so when you deal with people who've come from similar background, what would be some advice or suggestion that you would give them on how to get started towards a path to recovery?
For one, in a recovery program, you would usually have a sponsor, and that is somebody that you connect with and you can talk to anytime, night or day. You can ask them any questions, and they will really be a sounding board. And I would call and do reality checks because the way I came from and the way I processed, I would get with my sponsor and I would say, this is what I think. And he would look at me with a strange look on his face and say, really? And I'd say, yeah. He said, no. This is not how the average person would look at it because of what you went through.
Right.
And I would get direction, and I learned, and you can't take huge steps. They have to be little small steps to say, you can't cross this line. And if you do cross that line, there's going to be a consequence. And I can guarantee you that I will keep the consequence. Mm-hmm. And they eventually hear you. And people get angry because you've changed the rules. Sure. You say, you can't treat me that way anymore. You cannot speak to me in that manner. Mm-hmm. I just chuckled because the first time I ever set a boundary, I thought I was going to die. Sure. I really did.
Well, let me back up just a little bit. For anyone of the listeners who are not familiar with 12-step approach to things, who may not understand the role of a sponsor is different than a therapist. You're not going to them for therapy. You're going to them, as you said very well, sounding board, someone who's worked the 12 steps already, who can help guide you and navigate how to work the 12 steps. And sometimes a good sponsor will tell someone that they're sponsoring, you know, this goes beyond what sponsorship can handle. I really want to suggest you see a therapist for some of this. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. And I feel blessed in my recovery because I have never limited myself.
Okay.
Wherever I got to intuition that I needed to go to work on a specific issue, mm-hmm. be it a therapist, be it many things. The grief recovery work, I have tremendous recovery based on that work. Wherever the Lord sends me, I'll follow if it's going to make me a better person.
Cool. I like that approach to it. Now, something that's off the topic that is one of the things I really like about you is you're quite a horseman as well, too. You have a beautiful horse. I've met the horse. I sometimes like horses more than I do people. But it's at least when a horse is going to kick, you know it. So just to lighten it up a little bit, tell us a little bit about your horse.
Well, I consider in a lot of ways that I'm a rescue. And she's a rescue. Mm-hmm. They had a industry up in Canada because when women go through hormone replacement therapy, it's based on Premarin. Premarin is derived from pregnant mare urine.
Right.
So they would breed these horses to anything, so they would be pregnant, and then they would stand them in a pen just big enough to stand in for 23 and a half hours a day.
Wow.
So they can extract the urine. When those babies were born, about 50,000 a year, they would automatically ship them to the glue factory.
Oh my goodness, it's terrible.
And my mare was one of those. She had been rescued from Canada, brought down here, and then I've had her since she was 18 months old, and she's 17 years old. I've had 6 different horses, and she's by far the best one I've ever had.
Oh my goodness. Well, I wouldn't suggest singing to her the song "Stuck on You," where she was going, but that'll be for another radio show. Jack is looking like I'm going to pay for that later. So, working with, there's a reason why I bring in the animal aspect to it. Working with animals such as the horse and such, how has that affected you emotionally? Have you found that has also been helpful in your recovery?
Without any question whatsoever, my wife at one point said, you're a workaholic. You have no hobbies. You're a little uptight, just a touch. But every time you're around horses, or even horses are mentioned, you literally light up. She said, you need to get back into it. Well, I started working at the rescue, where I found my horse and I rescued her. And a dream of mine had always been to own a home that was horse property. And
Nice.
I thought, I'll never have that. I don't deserve that. That's never going to happen. Guess what? I live on a half an acre property, and if you look out my kitchen window and you haven't been out to feed them yet, you're going to have 4 eyes looking right through you saying, you need to come out and feed me. And we've got chickens, doves, 2 dogs, a cat. We're like the Jimenez ark.
Well, Gabby gets the same thing from me when I get up in the morning. I'm always looking at her like, you need to feed me, please, because she knows I'm absolutely helpless in the kitchen. Well, that's good. One of the reasons I want to talk about that is sometimes when people have gone through traumatic incidents, animals can do a type of therapy that other people can't do. My theory on that, and it's just a theory, is the fact that we receive unconditional love from these animals and we're able to be safe with them, and no matter what, they just love us. And so there's a real companionship there. And even though they can't verbally speak, I really believe animals have a great way of communicating. I mean, we have a sparrow that we can tell you about that is a very good communicator. I never have to question what she wants because she's found a way to communicate it. But the thing with Boo is there is a real love connection there, that I can be going through a tough time, and I've shared this with some of my friends. With my fibromyalgia and my arthritis, sometimes I'll sit down to do my morning meditation. I'll be in a lot of pain, and Boo will fly over. She'll land on my robe, and she'll just start rubbing her head under my chin to just kind of soothe me because she knows I'm hurting. That kind of love and gentleness, I think, is one of God's gift of therapy through the creation of animals. And we're getting ready to come up to our next break. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about that interaction, if you don't mind. And again, my guest tonight is Mr. Jack Jimenez, a life coach and grief recovery specialist, certified at that. And so we'll see you on the other side of the break.
Hey guys, this is Andrew Caravella. Just wanted to let you know that KCAA has a new listener line for all of you that have a phone. Now you can listen to KCAA in the grocery store, in the doctor's office, or when you want to pretend you're on the phone with someone just so that creeper will leave you alone. Call 720-835-3099 today and listen to your favorite KCAA radio shows. That number again, 720-835-3099. KCAA Radio, the station that leaves no caller or listener behind.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
Aaron here from On the Brink Morning Show, where we talk about all that is engaging in the Inland Empire. News, politics, business, family, things to do, and so much more. Join us weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. on KCAA 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, and 1050 a.m. or on kcaaradio.com.
And welcome back. You are tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or on the World Wide Web at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John, and I am your host, Father John Reed, with my guest tonight, Mr. Jack Jimenez. And a couple of housekeeping things. I want to give a lot of thanks to Brandon, our man behind the board, the genius that makes me sound good on the air. Say hello, Brandon.
Hello, thank you.
And I haven't gotten him to roll his eyes yet tonight. Usually when he fills in behind the board, I say something or other that gets him to roll his eyes and then say, I can't believe you said that.
Gold medal.
Gold medal. There you go. I like anything that's gold. And I also want to give a shout out to my beautiful wife, Gabby, who's sitting here across studio and keep me in line. And Jack's beautiful wife, Donna, and she's sitting across the studio from us. And she was telling us during the break about the one lady that comes between you two. You want to talk about that? Here's the confession, folks.
Okay, we have a little golden cocker spaniel named Lady Lou. And Lady was adopted for Donna. I didn't know she wanted a cocker spaniel. One came available. We got her. Well, at night, and I always said I don't want any more animals, because I raised 2 children by myself for 15 years, and it was just one more mouth to feed. Now she sleeps in the middle of us.
Wait a second, before you go there. You just made the equation of having 2 children that you raised with raising animals. I just want to make sure I heard that right.
It was just another mouth to feed.
Okay.
And more responsibility.
Yeah, go ahead.
This little cocker spaniel gets right up in our bed every night, right between the two of us, and lays there and says, okay. So she's the woman that came between us.
There you go. And you also have chickens too, right?
Yes.
Wow, okay. Well, that's pretty cool. So this has gone beyond just being another mouth to feed to now they're being members of the family. And to me, that's what animals have always wanted being in my family. They always become another member of the family. And during the break, you talked about how your dog adopted Donna and Donna's dog adopted you. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
So we were laughing during the commercial saying that we really don't pick animals, animals pick us. And that's kind of neat. When you are dealing with people in a therapeutic setting, do you ask them about if they have pets or if there's some place in their life that's absolutely safe besides the therapeutic room where they can just be at peace and be okay?
You know, my method is that I am a heart with ears. I listen for their cues. And I'm a pretty firm person, but I consider myself more their cheerleader.
Okay.
I'm not going to tear you up. I'm going to encourage you in all of your good points and give you tools to use to improve areas that need to be worked on. But I'm a cheerleader. Okay. I'm your cheerleader. I want you to love yourself. So that's what's going to come out. And wherever that road leads me, I will take the direction and I will go from there.
Very good. Well, with some of the clients I work with, one of the things I try to do, and I'd like to get your take on this, is I try to, also in the idea of being a cheerleader, and I like that analogy. I think that's a very healthy analogy. I try to teach them how to create their own safe space, where it's a place where they meditate and pray, where it's a place they listen to music, a place where they can go and they know, and this is going to sound kind of funny, but it really is important, that they know nobody can get to them, that that's their place, and they can be at peace there and not have to worry about anything from the outside attacking them. Do you work with them at all with that?
Very extensively and according to what the issue is. And when the work that I have them do, there's a lot of writing.
Good.
And these are things that people may never even know about you, or you may not want them to know about you. So I've learned through my own recovery that a very simple thing to do is to go out and buy a little metal container that can lock.
Right.
And when you're done with your writing, you put it in there where it's safe. Because if you don't feel safe, you will not get to the real core, deep stuff.
Say that again. That's very important. If you not feel safe, you will not get to deep core stuff. That's very wise. And so I like that method. I may actually incorporate that with some of my clients, because while we do writing, and I always tell them keep it in a safe place, I think you have a even better method of going with the lockbox, so that only they have the key. I think that's quite wise. One of the things I do with some of my clients is I'm big on gratitude lists, because, and my listeners hear about this quite a bit, the way our brain is designed, when something negative happens, it's like Velcro. It sticks, and it's there. When something positive happens, something good, what we call good, if we don't concentrate on it for at least 15 seconds, it goes through and doesn't stick to anything. It's like it never even happened. So with the gratitude list, it's a way of rewiring our brains that these good things happen. And I tell the people I work with, and I practice this in my own life, that you have to write no less than 3 things that you're grateful for that day, and they can't be the same thing twice. You know, if I was grateful for this yesterday, I can't use that today. I have to find something else. And there's times that I have to work for the 3 if it's been a really tough day. There's times that I may put 15, 20 things down if it's been a really good day. I mean, when I come home from this retreat I'm leading this weekend, I will probably fill several pages of gratitude, because I'll be on that emotional and spiritual high from that, which always happens when I get to lead a retreat. What is your approach with gratitude lists? Is that something you do as well?
I can quite honestly say that when I do the work, grief recovery, I have to separate a little differently than the work that I do in a 12-step program.
Okay, makes sense.
Because in the grief recovery, you're literally asking somebody to be courageous enough to deal with things that they haven't dealt with in 50 years and have never felt in 50 years. And I have to tell them, you know, when we get in the middle of this process, you're going to get real ouchy.
Right.
So you're going to really have to nurture yourself and know that don't put yourself in difficult situations where you have to make a decision. Be very gentle.
Good.
And we will work through it. We will get to the other side. But you got to trust a little bit. And that's hard for people that have been abused.
Right.
Trust is not a real sound issue. We all have issues with it.
Sure.
And I have to tell them, you have to have enough faith in me that I will be able to walk you through this process.
Right.
And I guarantee you what we can get through. So, yes, at the end of the gratitude list, at the end, yes, that would be a great thing to do. But in the middle of this,
right,
that's the last thing you'd be doing.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things I found with a lot of people, a sign that they're getting better and that we're really bringing up real meat and potato stuff is when they have to force themselves to come to their session. Because what that means is things are coming up that very heavy, and I tell them when that's happening, that's a good sign, and that's when you really need to get here. because it means we're really on the cusp of a great discovery and something that's going to really change your life. And so when they do, sure enough, within a few weeks, they drop the bombshell that they've been carrying forever. And then after that, it's like, I can breathe. And on the side of the patient, on the client's end. And then it's amazing the work that we do after that. And then we'll get to the point where, again, they find themselves having to really force themselves to come to the session. And they say, nothing must be going on because I really don't want to be here. I said, no, that's a sign something is happening. And so when they get there, sure enough, we have another breakthrough. Do you have that a lot with the people you work with?
You know, I've dealt a lot with men also in this process. And we've got a society that teaches men they can't cry.
Yeah.
They're not supposed to touch those real deep feelings. And these are deep. They're about as deep as it's ever going to get.
Sure.
And they're coming in and they're breaking down in tears.
Mm-hmm.
And they're half embarrassed because they're crying in front of another man.
Sure.
And I have to reassure them, thank you for the honor of sharing your tears with me.
Mm-hmm.
Because it means you trust me enough to be able to process this stuff, which is horrible stuff.
Sure.
It's not light. It's really deep. But to see the people that they become through that process is beyond any measure of what I could expect in return.
Well, they become really authentic because they can finally become what it is that they were created to be, whatever that is, because we're all created a little bit differently to be something else. But we can't get to that as long as it's covered up. And you're right, one of the problems we have in this society, I call it the John Wayne Society, and don't get me wrong, I am a John Wayne fan, but the idea of being so stoic, and I was talking about this with a group of people recently, that, you know, you look at the image that Hollywood gives people. You know, there's the old westerns where a guy lives in the desert with his horse. There's a problem in town, so they let the guy know. So he rides in, he says, where's the problem? They show him, and he goes, he takes care of it, and the problem's taken care of, and then he gets back on his horse and rides out back in the desert. And we think, wow, that's being a real man. And we think, what kind of weirdo lives in the desert with just a horse? You know, doesn't he have a girlfriend or anything? I mean, that's really kind of weird. But that's the image we've given people, that's what it means to be a man, and it is so false. What I've come to understand to be a real man is a man who can feel the feelings, a man who could be there for other people as they feel their feelings. A real man is somebody who can be authentic to whatever it is they're supposed to be doing in life. And it doesn't mean they have to be a tough guy. It doesn't mean they have to do a certain kind of occupation, but that they're comfortable in their own skin. And for the first time, they know who they are. And so what you're doing, I think, is a very important process, because it is a process. It's not an event. It's something that's ongoing. And my experience has been, and I like your comment on this, is that you don't just do it once. You go through this, you'll be okay for a while, and then there'll be some lessons we have to keep learning. We're talking at dinner about how life does not give social promotions. You know, until we learn our lesson from the experience, we must re-experience the lesson over and over and over again. It's not because life is cruel, but because life loves us enough to make sure we understand that lesson before we go to the next lesson. You want to comment on that a little bit?
Well, again, those who have questioned why I do this work, as much, and I have people literally call me and just say, thank you for everything you've done. And I said, you've done the work. You did that.
Right.
I helped you through it, but you did the work. That is so fulfilling, and it helps in my recovery. Mm-hmm. I want to be a nurturing, caring, loving male.
Right.
Not defined by what our society says a male should be.
Sure.
My definition of who I want to become, and who I honor in other men that can share that. Mm-hmm. And it's like that pebble in the middle of the ocean or the middle of the stream. Those vibrations go out in many, many, many areas
Yes.
and affect many, many lives.
The ripple effect, right.
And it's phenomenal. And I'll get a call 3 years later. Oh, so-and-so gave me your number, and he just raves about the work that you've done. Would you do it with me? And it's like, okay, let's do it.
Sure. Now, if the listeners want to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
I am not great on the media, and I just give my direct number and have them give me a call. Or I'm on Facebook also.
Would it be okay if we put your phone number on our website for people who'd like to contact you to do work with you?
Without any question, and I live in the Montclair area, and more than willing and available.
And for those who don't know, Montclair is the subsidiary of Claremont. The good people live in Claremont. Everyone else goes to Montclair.
We're the poor Claremont.
Right. That's what I was trying to say in the least nice way I could. And so you can tell Jack and I have been friends for a long time that he lets me get away with that. But next time I go down there, I'm sure he will set it up that his horse kicks me hard. just to make sure I understand. Probably kick me all the way back up to Claremont. But it's, one of the things that you do and we've done workshops together, and I've always enjoyed working with you. One of the things that stands out most to me is the way that you love people going through their process. And that's something you can't learn in school. Now, don't get me wrong. I know you have an education. Because when we were doing workshops together, we both had to put our education vitas into files for anyone to know what qualified us to do that. So I do know your education. But you can't train empathy into people. You could describe it, but either you're empathic or you're not. And either you're loving or you're not. And I've seen you work with people, and the love that you have surrounded them with, as a result of your becoming more authentic for yourself, is, I think, one of the most healing elements about the work you do, because you truly do create a safe place for people to come and be. And some of the work I do in men's spirituality, which people don't realize, that's a real specialty. There's a spirituality that's good for everybody. But there's also a spirituality directly for women, where women need to be with other women, and for men, where men need to be with other men, just for the dynamics, because there's some things that we can say to people of our own gender that we can't say in a mixed group, and vice versa. And I think it's very healthy to recognize that. One of the things I think we're really making a mistake in our society right now is we're trying to make it a unisex world. Look, we're created differently. Let's learn to appreciate that. One's not better than the other. They're on equal ground. But let's celebrate the beauty of all that we've been created to be. And for men, it's really important that we have some other men we can hang around that mirror what looks like to be a healthy, loving male. Would you agree with that?
I agree 100%. I was raised with three brothers who are all, I'm sure all three of them will have heart attacks screaming at the television during a football game. I know they will. They'll die right there. And their work and their comments about women's anatomy, that's very common. And they don't want to talk about emotions or other things. Well, I'm the opposite. I don't particularly want to talk about those three things. I want to talk about everything else.
Right.
So finding other loving, nurturing men has been a real journey for me and a really rewarding experience.
Well, outstanding. Well, I appreciate you sharing some of that experience with us tonight. Again, my guest tonight has been Mr. Jack Jimenez. Next week, we have a buddy of mine who's a Episcopalian priest. We call that Catholic light, all the ritual, half the guilt. And that's Father Barrett Van Buren, just like the street, Van Buren. And he will be here. Next week, we're going to be talking a little bit about palliative care and hospice care. So be sure you tune in. Again, I want to thank Brandon for doing a great job. I want to welcome to our crew Nick, who's going to be taking over the boards, I think, next week. And so welcome aboard, Nick. We're glad to have you as part of the family. If you're here 3 weeks, you get your own mug from the show, but you have to make it 3 weeks on this show to do that, unless you're a guest, and we give you one because you sat through this. And again, I want to thank Gabby for getting me here, and thank Donna for getting Jack here. And, you know, for all the listeners, I want to thank you for being a part of this show, and I want to thank those of you who contribute financially to help keep us on the show. And thank you again, Brandon, for working with us tonight. And if no one told you this week that they love you, let me be the first. And we look forward to talking to you again next week. God bless.